Greetings all. I already have a few viewers in here hanging out. Great to be here and see everyone. So I guess we'll start with the usual pitch. We are here on Twitch from the Tomes. We have hello from Florida. You're in Florida, Capo. Really? Great to tune in from Florida. How's Florida? Always reminds me of the Butthole Surfer song, Moving to Florida. It typifies Florida. The weirdness of Florida. Written years before Florida Man was a reality. Or at least a publicity reality. Landed an hour ago. Thanks for logging on. Tonight should be good. Problem players, right, Peach? Well, I'm going to talk about that. Let me give my little spiel first, though everyone here is aware of who we are, what we're doing, and but I'm getting a lot of second viewers, repeat viewers on this. So, From the Tomes is part of Fox and Boar Games for connection. Yes, no problem. Capo. From the Tomes is part of Fox and Board Games. It's kind of the media section of Fox and Board Games, if you want to call it that. And of course, if you're watching it live on Twitch, you know where it's at. And if not, if you're watching it on YouTube, you can go and subscribe here and follow along with the live chats. I also, in addition to this chat, about 3 times a week do a work chat where I work on role-playing game-related material, talk about my process, talk about where I'm at with my own game, in addition to working on other game material. And obviously, if you're here, or if you're going to watch this on Twitch, then we will, I'm going to ask you to go over to YouTube and sign up there, because I not only follow Fox and Board Games there, because I not only am archiving all of this material over on YouTube, but there is going to be YouTube-specific content coming in the future. So some of the big news is, which some of you already know, but I'll go over it as is usual. So my task this weekend was setting up the Fox and Board Games website. And I'll pop that up here for you all. Pull this down for a moment. So there's the Fox and Board Games website. As you can see, it is a pretty functional piece of web media. Of course, Tales of the Hard Line is front and center. We have news. We have games. So far, the only game is Hard Line, but that should be changing shortly. I just met with 3 other up-and-coming designers this morning on Zoom that I've been dealing with, who want to get some material to put up here for their up-and-coming games through Fox and Boar. And, of course, media and contact and about and all that. So that's where we're at as far as that goes. And let's see, we'll go back to the like and subscribe pitch. So yeah, obviously on Twitter and Facebook, you can find me there as well. The whole goal was to centralize all of the game-related material that I've been working on, and it decided to just go under the Fox and Board Games banner, which is how I'll be publishing, hopefully sometime later this year. So with that, we will begin our talk. I think it's only PJ and Capo here right now. I don't know if other folks are out working that I can't see. Feel free to say hi or not. Either one. So, problem players. It's an interesting and it's a big topic. I decided I would use this medieval illustration or Renaissance era illustration because I think this is kind of how we all feel when we have a player at the table that is bent on being really difficult. PJ's already said I've got stories of varying levels of problematic, but none that would reach immediate ejection or halt to play. So, I mean, this is the kind of stuff we're going to talk about. Now, I find it interesting, out of all of these chats I've done, even my stupid, like, May the 4th and come drink absinthe with me on Twitch while I talk about my sabbatical, right? Like these kind of one-off things I did before I really kind of formalized how this was going to work. This has been the lowest response of potential attendees. Now, it could be anything. It could be the weather outside. It could be the time that it's at on this particular date. But could it also be that it is something people are not necessarily overly comfortable discussing? You know, could it be that this is the kind of thing that, because a lot of times we are playing with our friends, sometimes we don't want to admit that our friends are being disruptive or problematic or anything like that. I don't know. I don't know what, I don't know if it has any relationship to the topic. I've noticed the past 2 weeks we've had a little bit of a dip of attendance, and I think that's simply because things are happening out in the world more. And the weather is, at a point that a lot of people are doing outdoor stuff. I don't know. Hey, that's great. Again, this will be here. I'm going to be doing this through the cold winter months. And and I think this is actually a discussion. This is a discussion I've seen pop up on a lot of RPG groups that I've sat in on, online groups, where, well, we have this player at the table that's doing this. So, I mean, I think the first thing to do is establish, what do we consider a problem player, right? Now, gamers are super broad, right? And they run the spectrum of personalities, beliefs, political and religious opinion. They run the gamut of eccentricities. Gaming has always been a haven for outcasts of one sort or another for many years. That was people who are on an autistic spectrum, ADHD, people who were atypical, neurally atypical in some fashion. So and gamers by and large, I found, are extremely tolerant. And that's what's cool, like, even if you've always had those people in the group that are kind of like, there's something that really annoys you about them. Usually in games, it is not the kind of thing that generates SS hostility. But so what do we qualify? So PJ has already described, plays first ed D&D game, who would read ahead in the module. So this is very typical, right? Which was annoying, but easy enough for the GMs to tweak and change. Yeah, it annoyed everybody who just wanted to play the game. It annoys the GM because they have to alter the encounter because a player has a. Now I have seen this, not very often, but I did have historically one or two players over the years, who, not anybody who I was close or regular with, but they would definitely cheat. I mean, if there's a way to cheat in an RPG, that's it, right? That and play around with dice. Hey, there's Justin. What's going on? Good to see you. I know you have stuff going on at the Birdhouse, your locale of business. So I didn't know if you were going to be on and be able to hop on at all tonight. We actually, for Friday night, we actually have our Warhammer games moved to Friday. So I at least won't be able to make it over to the concert, quite sadly. It's the last game of the campaign, the last session of the campaign. So there's no way I can. It's normally Thursday, but they moved it over to Friday. So I at least unfortunately won't be able to make it. Diana's supposed to play too. I don't know. Let's get there. So Unabashed Power Gamer. Now that gets into gaming style, and yeah. So people who really want to be the best, they want to win. Now, again, I've talked about this extensively. Justin's in our group, Hope and Flames, Andy, who comes on, Lauren, who was here last week. They're all in my regular group, And they are absolutely not about power gaming or min maxing. And it's so refreshing because I don't worry about any of that, right? There's no real problem. There's no real. And like Justin even said, like, we don't even have that one player that constantly disrupts everything. Like it's like really strange to play with a group where like nobody is creating an issue for anybody else. So I think back to people I consider problem players, some of whom PJ and I know mutually. One or two might surprise you, maybe not. I don't know, because some of them I know in a very long time. But I like view a problem player when they are disrupting the fun for everybody else. Like I treat it kind of like I do, you know, a problem student in a classroom. Like a student who's just difficult and is having difficulty learning. I don't really find problematic. It's when there's somebody that for some reason feels the need to disrupt a game. And they usually are doing it, I in my estimation, 9 times out of 10, they're doing it to keep the attention on themselves. I mean, that's just generally the trend that I've seen in this. You know, I am not by any means a psychoanalyst, but I have noticed the definite trend there. So yeah, so that I mean the a power game, right? Power game in and of itself can be part of a game, actually, right? Like you can definitely have. There are certain games that definitely. I mean, even D&D. So the discussion we've been having about D&D is we're making our D&D characters is, and oh yeah, okay, well yeah, okay, yeah, all right. Well, we'll get to that. We'll get to sulking because that's another one for me. But we are hello to a couple new people who popped on who are in the lurk. Welcome. So I think the cases I think of where someone's been a real problem has been that when they have for whatever reason decided to derail a game and then they hijack everyone else's fun by saying, well, my character's not going to do that. I'm not going to play, or I'm going to go sit in a corner, or I'm going to then sit there and roll dice as loud as I can at the table to disrupt the narrative. Now again, when I was 15 to 25 in gaming, I put up with a lot more. You know, there's no way I would ever even sit at a table with someone doing that these days. I couldn't do it. My time is too valuable now. You know, I would have to take them aside. Well, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about like how do you deal with this. But the reading ahead in the module and cheating. This is something I see not irregularly even now on some of the RPG groups that I frequent. You know, I have this player who already read this module and they're walking through it and they, you know, are claiming they've never read it, but clearly they have. I mean, I don't know. What do you do with that, right? So the player whose character isn't the best or doesn't always succeed, or when something bad happens to their character. Now, okay, if you play one of my games, you better get used to it, right? Especially a horror game. Like Justin can attest to that, right? Like even D&D can be a little tough with me because I don't have any problem really challenging the players and the characters environmentally and intellectually as well as with monsters. But then what do you do when you have this case where this person isn't the success, they're not the star, and suddenly, you know, they are pouting and sulking. Let's see. Yeah, yeah, well, yeah, exactly. And now. See, it's funny because definitely there is this swing in the genre of game and the game specifically that you see these behaviors in. I've sat in very few Call of Cthulhu games with people who had any idea of what the game was about, who had a problem with their character not being great at something or dying because that's just part of the game. I've definitely seen it more in fantasy games or in you know sci-fi games where there is this power fulfillment aspect. So So yeah, so that's what I was gonna say is my thing with these games is part of my fun with it is the problem solving, presenting the narrative, trying to figure out the narrative as the game master, watching the players try to figure out the narrative as the player trying to solve the puzzle, basically. Now, again, some games are more straightforward. You solve the puzzle by killing the orcs. Okay, great. The town gets their treasure back and killed the orcs. But in other games where there's definitely more of this kind of mystery going on. So this is also part of it, right? Yeah. Stare, well, buddy, I've been staring 50 in its beady little eyes. I've stared past it. So and there has definitely been a shift, even in the past 10 years, of how I manage games and also what I'll put up with at a table. So I'll just recount one. So there's the famous, and I don't know if Blake. I don't think Blake's gonna make it on time. He usually doesn't make it for the evening events, but Blake and I talk about this frequently. Where there was a player that was a regular for many years in many of our games, who PJ may know, who the person had definitely changed by the time you met them, but they would typically make a character that did not fit in with anybody or anything else, and they would want to go do their own thing. And when we wouldn't satisfy this, they would really get pissed off. Um, okay, so Justin, that's actually going to be for another topic about GM overreach, but it's not unrelated to this one because there. I don't know if Tom's going to make it on tonight. Tom Plaza. Probably should say people's real names out loud. This is bad. But Wendell Burke, I've known in the non-virtual world as well. Tom, I said his name to differentiate him from the other Tom, which several of you know, and he said, okay, but what if the player's not the real problem? Okay, so we're going to get to that. Because when I first brought this topic up to him during a daytime chat, he was a little skeptical. He was like, okay, that's dicey. Because what if it's a case where all the other players in the GM are assholes and this guy's just not going along with it? Oh, there he is. Yeah. Yeah, I'd make a terrible secret. Yeah, I just blurted your real name right out. I did it to keep Capo the other day, too. Yeah, absolutely. There's a reason why I'm not a criminal, and has nothing to do with morals. Okay, well, but yeah, yeah. And but again, this is I think it's going to be a whole other topic because this gets into GMs. So anyway, Wendell slash Tom, um, you brought up that very valid point, and I've been in this situation. What if you get into a group, maybe not even a game group, but a social group, and yeah, we'll talk about that too, Jay. What if you're in a social group and you become the asshole because you're just not the one who's going to go along with everything? Whether you're a teenager and it's doing something criminal, which frankly I actually kind of went along with a number of those, but aside from that, as an adult, people who are not treating certain people well, and you just decide you're not the one that's not going to go along with it, and you become the guy that's causing the problem. I mean, this is not an alien thing to me in recent history. And I've left several social groups and creative groups in the past number of years because of people who just were not treating other people well, And what if they're the problem? But anyway, set up because there weren't trees. That's right, you told me about that, Capo. There aren't trees here. But that's GM. That's a different discussion. And I'm not discouraging the discussion, but I'm saying this is different. So what I'm talking about are players who disrupt the game, and what does the GM do about it, and how does the GM handle it, and what's considered like a disruption. So earlier in the chat, earlier in the chat, let me see if I can scroll back up. Peach says, so I think a big part of this is the player management and the expectation management. Now, obviously, if a guy, or I know I shouldn't use guy generically, I know that. If a person makes a game and, yeah, yeah, Absolutely. Right. Right. Well, Blake was not on tonight. We also have another example of that where we became the problem players in a campaign a few years ago because we were the ones who just weren't being what we were saying was never considered. And when we finally called people out on it, they got really mad about it. And I'm like you've kind of just been creating a problem for us for like 6 weeks now, you know? Like every time I have a suggestion, you throw it out the door. So again, and I am actually as a person who is naturally a dissenter, I am definitely aware that there are people whose personality is just to be contrary for in a Socratic method to challenge an order, to challenge an establishment, and so there's the one player that I've talked about years ago, and again I'd been friends with this person even before we started gaming together, and when it came to gaming, he just became this extremely self-centered person. I mean, he was self-centered anyway, but this extremely self-centered person in terms of he had to control the game. Now, he was also a game master who would write narratives that were immovable, that were totally, they were his narrative and that was the way it was going to be. But he also, as a player, when things didn't go his way, he would literally take his toys and go sit in the corner and pout while everyone else was trying to play the game. And again, this was a good friend, and this was a person I spent a lot of time with outside of gaming. So, like, kind of what do you do with that? Now, when I might have been at that point in my life in gaming in a different way with different reasons with more time, I think a lot of us tolerated stuff like that from people we knew, especially if we were friends with them outside the game. What if you encounter that now? So I think setting up the expectations is a big part of it, managing it with a session zero, and seeing what players really want out of an experience, and if it's your responsibilities, let's say you're running a game online for strangers, like you decide, like, are you going to just suggest that player doesn't join the game, or are you going to tailor the game to them? What if it becomes a regular behavior in a game? Well, yeah. I mean, of course. I there was one night in an online game I almost rage quit because of the dice, and it was not anybody's fault. It was literally the dice were being horrible to me, and I said to the game master, I said, I'm really about to log out. I said, no offense to anyone, I'm really about to log out because I'm really getting ticked at these dice. So I mean, that's one thing. I'm getting some really rough latency tonight too. That's one thing. But we have the type of player who is dissatisfied. Okay, yeah. Who is dissatisfied because their character can't be the best at whatever they do. But is that because that their character isn't the best at whatever they can do, or they feel that they've fallen short of expectations? Or the game has fallen short of their expectations? And to what is done to manage that? So I'm just reading Capo's discussion that the guy or girl or whoever person, they argued, this GM argued this ridiculous point until a player left. So like in that game master's mind, was that player the problem? No, I don't think it's your Wi-Fi. I'm getting like I just had to drop down to like less than 1,000 kbs. I mean, it might be your connection, especially for being mobile and you're out wandering around in Florida. Never know. Never know what kind of stuff's going on in the way airwaves down in Florida. Yeah, no. Trust me. Even in our regular game, as Justin can testify, there are dice that are occasionally thrown across the room or put in dice jail, or something like that. Because it's. But I don't think that's a problem player. I think having that momentary frustration, or even that momentary frustration with a scenario or with the game master, I think is part of a group dynamic. I don't think that necessarily causes that person to be a problem. But what do we do if we know this person well and it becomes a habitual situation? Or if we're sitting down to run a game in public someplace and this becomes a habitual situation where there's this derailment of the game in one way or another. They're cheating. I mean, I did when we were in our 20s, we had a 45-year-old coworker of mine come over to play and he did nothing but cheat the whole night. It was kind of hilarious because it was so transparent. It's like he didn't even care that he knew that, that we knew that he was cheating. So we pretty much get over it. So we pretty much just asked that guy to leave. We didn't even ask him to leave because he was one of my coworkers. We just didn't invite him back. It was simple enough. He wasn't like a close friend. It was kind of like it. But we did around that same time have another player that we literally just kept trying to ditch, and he kept showing up. And he would whine. He would become very argumentative. And again, now as a much older person, I realized this guy, he had a really shitty home life. He had other issues going on. And there were obviously a lot of other things way beyond gaming there. And of course, now if I had that person in my group as an older person, and it was a younger person behaving like this, I probably would try to figure out, okay, well, what can we do to help facilitate and integrate this person? But there are sometimes players who just are there to not get along. And I've talked about this, and this wasn't that long ago. I mean, well, it was. It was probably about 18 years ago. It doesn't seem that long ago to me now. But I was, in my 30s. We just moved into one of the houses in North Jersey, and we found a couple local gamers. And there was a person who would show up who now I recognize was definitely probably on the spectrum, who was continuously disruptive. Again, would constantly make characters that did not work with the narrative, or even in character attempt to subvert the narrative. And eventually started evidencing aggressive behavior, particularly with other players who were women, both in and out of game. So that became this whole other level of problematic, right? That went just beyond, all right, this guy's an annoying player, to he's actually saying and doing things that are making people uncomfortable at the table. And I don't think Russ is on tonight, but I think Russ could testify to another person who was at some other games that he and I were at that definitely evidenced some behaviors like that. And and it was always cloaked in a joke. And it was kind of, once or twice you're like, okay, yeah, whatever, man, you're just being a jerk. But then when those kinds of behaviors become habitual, and then you find out they're extending to basically harassment outside of a game environment, that's a problem. And what do you do about that, right? I mean, obviously the answer was that person was not invited back. And at one point I did have a discussion with them outside of the game environment. And they of course were claiming to be somewhat forthcoming and understanding about how this was affecting not only the game but the players as people. Then he went right back to the behavior, within a game session or two. So like, what do you do? But this starts to kind of segue into what Wendell and I had discussed in another channel, in another one of these talks, just casually as I was writing and he was chatting. What if it's really not the player who's the problem? But I think that's another discussion. Like we're kind of circling back to control freak GMs, but again, I think that's a different kind of discussion than a player. So we when we moved to invite only and started cutting down the player list. So yeah, so I remember this whole thing, Peach, that it went from big public games to private games, and a lot of that had to do, of course, with certain very hostile and disruptive personalities who who we've discussed before, and we won't get into that. But it also had to do with those days, especially in the LARP environment, this kind of behavior was like sometimes like clockwork. I mean, I had one guy who was just he was just ill behaved at one of these LARPs, but other than that, he was doing like openly criminal things, drug use at the time, which was before any of this was legal, like in open areas of the hotel where you know where the whole thing could get shut down, we could all get thrown out, and the cops could get called. Like that was a whole other level of problem player. There was the famous case that I don't think you were present in the room for, but where a certain player of those early games had definitely had too much to drink, definitely had yeah, I remember some of those discussions about the total creeps. I remember that. So we had a player at the Necropolis games who everybody knew very well and was generally a likable guy who was ex-military, and that probably tells you who he was. I mean, I know there were a couple, but this person individual who also drank a lot, and he did other things in excess. And there was a night in one of the scenes in one of the hotel rooms where he pulled his gun, his service revolver, his prop. It was a real gun. Nobody knew if this thing was loaded, if it had live ammo. This guy was clearly intoxicated. It was a bit of a panic moment because while this person was the nicest guy 99% of the time, as soon as that shifts, and I mean that's an extreme case, and that's right out of 1991. I don't see too much of that happening now at live action role playing games. The whole scene has changed so much, and the culture then was so different. And I, I'm pretty sure a danger to themselves and others. And I think you probably know who I'm talking about. Yeah, yeah, and I know that was a big discussion because again, there were definitely mixed genders and varied genders at some of those early LARP games. Nothing like it is now, but I know especially at some of them, there were players who were presenting as women or women who would complain about certain players and certain game. Yeah, you heard about it from Steve Jack. Okay, yeah. So I would say that these behaviors, some of what is being called out now and being made public now as problematic in society at large, were extremely common in those days. But those were a whole other thing. I mean, that was this whole other level of harassment that could get dangerous. So let's go to what Wendell says here. So the session 0. Oops. Did I close my chat window? I did. All right. So back to session 0. So it's a series of communications. Yeah, so session 0 is more than just everybody sitting down and saying, what characters are we going to play? If you don't know the people involved, it is a way to get to know them before the game starts and hopefully alleviate some of this. If in no other way, finding out what the basic personality is. Now, I have had a case where I did talk to someone for quite a while online before they finally came to a game, and they were okay the first couple games, but they also were like habitually cheating and habitually writing stuff into their character sheet that wasn't there, I mean, and this was, again, this wasn't a kid, this wasn't even a teenager, this was supposedly a full grown ass individual, who then you're like, well, what do you even do? Because they're not going to be truthful if you confront them. This person had other reality issues as well. So again, gamers have always been an eccentric bunch, and I think it's a weird thing because I've had two sorts of gaming experiences. I've had gaming with good friends or people who would become good friends or who I knew fairly well before the game started, and then you have the other experience where either you run into players and you decide you're going to jump in and game with them, or you then meet them online or meet them at a con or something like that. And you don't actually really get to know them until you've sat in half a dozen sessions with them. So I think those are two very different things. So how about you guys? What do you define as a problem player? And we've already seen some examples from Peach, and a lot of it has to do with things like throwing temper tantrums and instigating issues at the table. We saw the problem of I know that she's getting bumped on and off tonight due to her being in transit, but I don't know if if she's still on, if she has any experiences. I don't know how many games she's run. There you are. So a flashcard consent system. So, I think when you're dealing with touchy subject matter, and I know this is being used in a lot of games now, both tabletop and in LARPing. Oh. So, well, just to move on with what Capo's saying, yeah, I think that's kind of how a lot of this is going. And as I start to think about running games publicly online, maybe as part of a job, I start to think about how do I manage this. So there was a big discussion on one of the better forums that I sit on about slavery in games and concepts of slavery. Now, we know that slavery is, one, extremely uncomfortable and unpleasant. We know it is still practiced in various forms today, whether it's, neo-feudal societies or human trafficking. But we also know it's historical. And early D&D did not shy away from this. It was from the Robert E. Howard mold of fantasy where, half-naked women in chains. Sure, they're on every book cover, every module cover. And again, that wasn't right, but that's what was coming out. Whereas Tales of the Harrowed Land, it's built on Bronze Age societies, analogs of Bronze Age societies. There is slavery. So how do you discuss what's comfortable with people? And I think a flashcard system or some kind of non-invasive, almost an RPG safe word, right? Like something that tells you a player does not want to go down this road. I know the one LARP I have recently been at does this. So, PJ, current campaign world, one of my players would not be bothered to read the world building. So this brings up another type of problem player, the chronically unprepared. I'm not talking you have to look something up, right? I'm talking the person who gets to the game and they have no idea what's going on. And this is also not uncommon. And in fact, there's one group of players who I like very much as people, but I kind of just can't even game with them anymore because you get there and they have not even finished their character sheets. And they're not anybody anyone here knows, so it's not a big deal. But they couldn't even be bothered to get the character sheets done, much less read world history. And in almost all of my games, understanding the setting you're in is very important, even if it's D&D. I mean, I can fake D&D. You can move through D&D in a Tolkien-esque world and whatever. But if I stick you in one of my historically based games, you have to understand, to play this game, you have to understand the culture, the language, what people do and what they don't do. That's part of the experience of the game. Yeah, well, and then at that point, as are you as the game master? Is it your right and your responsibility to just say to them, look, you can't play until you have that, you know, you have that. So, yeah, Desert Desolation was all about slavers, and you weren't, and slavers weren't the good guys. So let's see what Wendell's got here. Genuine communication up front. Now, as some of you know, I am very blunt at this stage of my life. I don't even, pretend like, oh, I'm going to sugarcoat this. And when it comes to my games, I understand it's a game and I understand it's fun, but you're also spending a lot of time and a lot of other people's time. So, yeah. Well, right. And if it's a case where a player is being disruptive, and many times they don't necessarily even realize they're being as disruptive as they are. A lot of times, if it's an attention thing, they legitimately think they're being funny when they do something or say something, so you do have to just take them aside and say, look. And in many cases, that's all it needs. Like there was one case a number of years ago where I had a guy who just was always cracking jokes. He was always just like blurting out and cutting in on when I was talking. And I just took him aside. I was like, look, objectively, a lot of what you're saying to is funny. But like when I'm trying to get this game rolling, like please just let me finish. And he was better after that. He was like, he actually apologized. Like, oh, I'm really, really sorry. I didn't realize I was being that much of a pain. Um, let's see. Yeah, Peach is getting some credit here. I'm just checking to see what people are saying about. So, so yeah, and I think we talked about that in person, Wendell. Like you said, basically, when you run a game in your mind, it has to be at least as good of a book. And if players aren't willing to invest that much in it, then they just don't last with you as a game master. And I mean, I'm not. It depends on the group I'm running for. Like I said, I can run a very beer and pretzels game, and I'm totally fine doing it. And we'll sit around and quite literally drink beer and eat pretzels while I'm running this game, and it's fun and it's not meant to be particularly serious. That's fine. But when I do, like when we started Call of Cthulhu, I just told my group, I was like, look, first of all, everyone's got to be with it, sober for the most part. When the game starts, the lights are going down. When the lights go down, cell phones are off. If you have to take a call, that's great. Just go in the other room, whatever. You don't sit and text at the table. Don't sit there. It's like I had to kind of make it clear, like this is as much about the mood of the table and the interaction of the table, and as it is about your character and sitting around and chatting with everybody else. So, and again, my group's great, and this was not even an issue. This was no thing. But I just wanted to clarify to them when I run this game, this is how into it I get. Let's see. So this is a little more about the consent system. 4 cards, green, yellow, red, and any other color of choice. Green is good, I'm in character and not actually mad. So this is an interesting discussion too. Yellow is I'm getting uncomfortable, maybe tone down the situation. Red is stop the action. The other color is bathroom break. Yeah, well or I can talk to red can talk to the DM privately. So, I mean, that's a very valuable thing to do in terms of a LARP especially, but it could even be effective at a table. Now, that's another sort of player I've run into. Oh, well, I didn't really mean that. That was just my character. Meanwhile, you've just like insulted the person's mother or something. Like maybe not that. But I mean, I saw this a lot with the LARPs too. And there was one person in particular, I don't remember the player's name, but she would get so worked up during a scene, she would get really mad and get really vicious. And then she'd always be like, "Oh no, I hope you know that wasn't really me. That wasn't really me. That was my character." Like after the third time it happened, I'm like, "No, I don't think we're talking in character anymore." Because this is you. You might be saying this is your character, but this is clearly you. So I mean, that's another type of player, someone that has these issues and hostilities. Now again, I'm talking 30 years ago. I'm talking before a lot of things that were addressed and treated on a medical or personal level are treated the way they are today. Because again, clearly there was something else going on with this person. And they were normally very nice. And I remember having whole conversations with them like, after the game, or you know, let's see. So the play style crystal clear up front, appealing. Yeah, absolutely. And that's part of what I've realized I've had to be. I've realized that anymore that the expectations in gaming are so varied. A lot of times when you run into a player who's problematic, it's in reality that they're not playing the game they thought they were going to, and they're frustrated with that. And that kind of goes back to what if the player isn't really the problem, right? Like maybe this player in another game would be great, but they went into your game thinking they were going to get one thing out of it. And I differentiate this from the whiners that PJ's talking about. Oh, my character didn't hit that monster. I'm gonna make a new character and go sulk. I mean, trust me, I've seen plenty of that too. And yeah, absolutely. He's better after that. That's intent. I would say that in some cases, the he was better after that is because the person really had no clue how they were being perceived. And I've definitely run. Yeah, well, and they have responsibility too. And I think part of it is, and again, this is never an excuse, but certain times people come from other social situations or groups of people or gaming groups where certain things are permissible. And in their assumption, any group they step into is going to find it funny, find it cute, that they're going to be able to do what they want. And if they're serious about the game, then perhaps they will step back and reevaluate it. So I mean, I generally, and I treat all my environments this way. I generally give a person one chance, one real serious chance. Like if someone's really being disruptive, and again, I haven't had to deal with this in a long time in games. If someone's really being a problem, really being disruptive, really being antagonistic, like I'll talk to them once. I'll talk to them once and I'll just say, okay, like, do you understand the way that this is being perceived? Do you understand that you're making other people either annoyed or uncomfortable and these other things? And then usually if they don't get the hint after once, they're usually gone. And I'm actually really at the point in life that I don't have too much trouble just saying to somebody, I don't think you're going to come back. I don't think this is the game for you. And then, like you said, I usually just phrase it as, look, there are plenty of groups that might want to play this way with you. Now, so the extension of this is MMO guilds. And that's where I've dealt with more of this recently than even tabletop. Because again, my tabletop experiences have been kind of selective in the past few years. So in MMO guilds, I've run two guilds basically. One in Lord of the Rings Online and one in WoW. Both were small. But I'd have people where just, it'd be like one or two strikes. Saying something really offensive, screwing things up for everybody else. And in video games it's even worse because a lot of people don't even have this. Even though we called it a role-playing group. People in MMOs don't necessarily even have the same idea of what role-playing is as you do in a tabletop. First of all, there's no work investment, right? You don't have to actually sit and build your character for 2 hours. I would just say this reminded me, actually this whole discussion reminded me of another player that PJ and I mutually know from the old days where, he played one of my games once. He was a regular for a while at some of the Necropolis games, but he was one of the ones that I think got filtered out. And he played in one of my games, and he got really, really pissed when I asked him to write down some of the things his character was going to do and some of the clues he was going to act on. He was like, oh, I have it all up here. I'm going to remember it all. In my mind, I'm like, no, you're not. You're not going to remember any of this. And then, like, the more I was like, look, I really kind of need to know your character's plan. Like, if you tell me you're going to do these things, I need to know how you're going to do it. And he got, like, really, like, visibly mad. Well, yeah, and preference differences are fine. So again, this goes back to what I was saying before, where Blake and I were in this group, and we just didn't mesh with the other players, and we just decided to opt out because it was just very clear, like what they wanted out of the game play style, and the person who was running it, I'm still very good friends, and they just, it was just a case where they're at that point we were the problem, right? Because we just didn't go along with, we weren't involved and interested in this game in the way that this other group was playing it. And we just decided it just wasn't, I'm just not having fun. Not for me. See you later, but we didn't try to disrupt the game. We didn't try to screw over other people, So I think that's the big difference here. Yeah. 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 So, right. And now I have seen that a little bit too. So there is definitely, especially with kind of the new wave of populist, let's call them populist players that have latched onto these games. I mean, I've had students say that to me in the classroom. Well, I'm paying for this class. What you have to say isn't important. I'm paying for this class. Well, clearly, I'm sure you can imagine my response to that. Especially once I was tenured. That my response to that was not what any of them wanted to hear. And I have had a few students drop because I just have been blunt with them. Been like this, yes, it's your class, but you're not doing anything, so get out. But when it comes to gaming, I have definitely seen a little bit more of that in recent years in terms of, yeah, in terms of recent years where players definitely feel, well, no, this is really all about me because I'm the player. Well, you're not the one doing all the work, writing and prepping the game. So in a way, and this goes back to the other discussion that I want to have at some point about GM overreach and about how GM styles can drastically impact player enjoyment as well. Yeah. No, I actually, well, I dress a little less formally. I dress more formally than I do when I'm, going to a show, but or I'm going out on stage to perform. But I'm beyond the vest and suit jacket thing. Like that's just not me. Usually it's just a black shirt and a black button up shirt and slacks of some sort. But yeah, and again, I tend to, and this isn't to be pedantic. It's like I tend to treat gaming tables a lot of the same ways that I manage classrooms at this point. And I find that I'm generally pretty successful. But just like in the classroom, I do occasionally find the player that no matter how many times you try to reason with this person and have this discussion and say, well, can we get to a point that we're both working on this together? Sometimes there are people who just are not, are not gonna do that because whatever's motivating them to behave in a certain way is not simply misunderstanding, and it's not simply not understanding a boundary which you can define. In some cases, it is somebody who feels the need to disrupt things for whatever reason. And I generally find it's for one of two things. I generally find it's for attention or for control of the situation. I haven't seen too many other motives that make sense for somebody to take their toys and go home and pout in the corner while everybody else is trying to have fun. I mean, to me, that's a personality trait. To me, that's more than, I didn't understand the situation, or I didn't really understand how I was coming across. To me, that is a person whose personality is dictating that for whatever reason bad thinking, yeah, good thinking will be rewarded, bad thinking will be punished. Yeah, seriously. Well, that's kind of the nature of the RPG, right? You punish the good thinking, or you reward the good thinking, you punish the bad thinking. Um, and yeah, so I mean, that's touching on an even kind of broader end of this. Like, it's not my job to tell anyone how to have fun and what to do. Like if someone comes into one of my games and they are so bent on being disruptive, that they're clearly not having fun. Again, that goes back to like, is the player really the problem, or is it just that they do not understand what this is about and they don't enjoy what this is about? And we should have a talk and see if they want to go jump in on, go find another game. But again, this also gets more complicated. It's easier for me in this day and age because outside of my very close group of friends who I play online with once a week, some of us have known each other most of our lives, and we're all very open, by the way, when it comes to any kind of perceived issue in the group, and there really isn't any. But the bigger challenge now is like if you go and run a game in public, like if I go to run a play test or if I go to run at a con or something, how do you manage it? So we had a case when we were doing Blight Realms. Tom Curzon, there's Blake. Oh, there he is. Well, yeah, there's Blake. He's always the problem player. Oh, yeah, well, he has been the problem player. He was one of the Warhammer sessions. And that was a whole other issue. That was the GM was like, we were like, what do we get for experience? The GM was like, negative. You're getting negative. You screwed it up so badly. You're getting negative. A Munchkin Guide to Power Gaming, which is hilarious parody, right? So yeah, I mean, power gaming, munchkining, but all those things are almost the sort of thing you expect in a play group. Like you expect that somebody might do this, you expect that's part of gamers and gaming, and that can be problematic. And especially in games that are very character-centric and are narrative-driven, it is extremely disruptive to have a guy that's just, or girl, whoever, that's just interested in how much damage they can do, when that's clearly not the point of the story. But that's where I think Wendell's discussion of the session zero and not only just a session zero where he's, this is what the game's going to be about, it's how you make a character, a series of discussions about what people want out of this and what you as the game master are planning out of it. And again, some of the frustrations I've seen that have come in and led to problems have been because there just was no set expectation as to what this was going to be about. But yeah, so what I was saying is that I think this becomes trickier when it's a person you're friends with outside of the game, and then when they get into the game, they are extremely problematic. Even if it's just in the game environment, whether it's a competitiveness, whether it is an inability to deal with failure, whether it's an inability to deal with not being the star. So, and again, this, like all the topics I throw out, I put the hot button title of problem players. But what I'm really talking about here is, as several of you have pointed out and realized, is about communication and about setting up an expectation. Aside from the few examples that we've talked about, we're talking about real problems. Players that create real serious interpersonal problems and discomfort at the table. As I said, I kind of define it as someone who seems there to only disrupt the game. Yeah, you're keeping quiet. Well, I already said about I already talked about the player that was famous in our group for doing that exact thing. But I also mentioned they were also the control freak GM. And it was all about like, well, if they weren't in charge and they weren't the star, then, F everybody else. I'm going to go do this and screw the game up. And I remember this person screwing multiple games up, while we were trying to have fun. And I told PJ, I said, this person, you probably don't realize who this is, but it's someone that we all gamed with, and they were different by the time, that had come around to some degree, but it was, it was definitely challenging for a while. But I also pointed out, Blake, you never knew this other person. Yeah. Well, so this we actually talked about this a little bit, but I kind of derailed it because I do want to have a whole conversation about GM overreach. So, like Capo was just saying, among my friends, the worst you're going to get is shit posting. Well, no, that's common, but Like I said, even my group, even my regular in person group, sometimes I'm like, all right, people, stop like sending each other texts at the table, and I'm trying to run the game. That's to me, that's not a problem. That's just players being players. And yeah, usually most of the times once I yell at them once they stop, and it's all right. Justin, I don't know if Justin's still here. Once once I yell at everybody, it stops. But yeah. But Blake, we already said that too. Like, what if the player really isn't the problem? What if the player really isn't the one who's the problem here? But I think that's another discussion. And Capo discussed about, a GM that basically bullied a player so badly they left the game over hanging a hammock in the game, right? Hanging an imaginary hammock in a game. And the GM just was so bent on it they couldn't do it. They basically bullied the player into leaving. Like, that's a whole other thing. And again, that's something that we can also have a discussion on. But like I said, I've tended to find GMs who have that sort of personality also don't make very good players. And even if they're great at putting up a character and coming up with concepts, personality wise, if they're not the one calling the shots, it becomes a disruption. And again, the person Blake and I are thinking of, that was definitely the case. And as I said, I discussed, let's see, a player with a problem doesn't have to be or act perfect. Yep. Trying genuinely, yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. Right, absolutely. And that's kind of my litmus test too. I mean, frankly, it's my litmus test with students. It's my litmus test with collaborators. And I don't want to get into this on this stream. I don't want to get into this publicly. But Wendell, Blake, and one or two of the other people in Capo met some people from a previous project I was involved with. And the project dissolved when I realized they just didn't want to have an adult conversation about anything. About things I perceived as a problem that they didn't, and they were just willing to keep, floating along and ignoring. And it all dissolved because they were not willing to actually have these discussions. And that's kind of how I treat everything now. And same thing with the social group that I walked out on 2 or 3 years ago that I had been very active in. It was all about the fact that whenever I tried to communicate this issue or an issue, even if it was my issue, no one else was interested. So I think though, Capo, yeah, and that's absolutely fine. Hey, you know what? In the vampire game, we text each other regularly. Our characters do, like while we're sitting at the table. Like, it's because some of our characters have a greater proficiency. It's less in this scenario. In another scenario, there were two anachronistic characters, one of mine being included, who literally didn't even understand how to use this technology. But so we actually did text each other in game, but at the table. So I think that's one thing. But what I'm talking about is like somebody finds a funny meme during a D&D game and sends it to everybody at the table while we're there trying to play D&D. And again, I'm really like, I've definitely stepped away from being control freaky at the table. And, all right, it's funny. Okay, haha, let's get back to the game. And usually that just goes on to that. And again, when I run D&D, it's very beer and pretzels. It's not super focused. I prepare for it. It's a fun game. The players all love playing, but for them, it's as much about playing the game together as it is solving the mystery or fighting the monster or whatever. So again, that group and that game in particular becomes a very different dynamic than say the Call of Cthulhu game, or if I'm going to run the Tales of the Hallowed Land game at a playtest level, especially where I need engagement, I need focus, I need feedback. That's when I definitely could turn on the a-hole lever a little bit, and be like, no, like, we're in the game. And that's it. So Vampire is another one. Now Vampire, due to the time that we have to run it, we have to play it during the day, which is, I know that's taboo. Right. We know that's taboo in Vampire to play during the day, but we have no choice because just the times that people can get together. But Vampire is another one of those games where I know Peach was at some of the tabletop games we ran that we played in where the lights went down and you were in character. And that was it. Now, of course, there's no cell phones then because we're ancient. But it was a case where with lights went down, you were in character. If you had to step out of character, you left the room. If you had to step out of character and talk to other players, it had to be like a formal process. It wasn't. So do I. And like I said, I'm very fortunate with the bulk of the experiences I've had with the group that I have in person right now. And as I said, when I get into a situation where I focus it and we really try to keep it on track for an atmospheric game, everybody does go along with it, but it's still different than when we didn't have these distractions, right? When you wanted to check something on a computer, you had to get up and go in the other room and turn a computer on, right? Not everybody had a computer in front of them in some form or another. I mean, another type of problem player is the constantly distracted player. It's the player that cannot focus on the game and has to do 50 other things while the game's going on. Like, now, I admit, when I'm at the house, when I'm at my house and I have an 80-pound dog howling in my ear, it's kind of hard to not get up and take the dog out, right? I'm not talking about stuff like that. But another player I'm thinking of who's also a very good friend, one of the people who has some problems in terms of character development, they're just are taking the time to develop the character. They never sit still at the table. And every 5 minutes they're getting up and doing something and then coming back and like we're in the middle of something and they're like, well, where are we? And like once that happens, it happens once or twice during a game because they have to attend to something, that's fine. But if this becomes a chronic thing and how do you address it? Especially if it is real life stuff they have to deal with. I mean, sometimes it's not, sometimes it is. So again, okay. So the way I always phrase all this, I mean, there's that line, and I think we've gotten to that. We've gotten to this. We're getting to the line of we have players who are doing things that are sometimes frustrating, sometimes disruptive, but there's not the intent there. There's not the intent in terms of actually trying to cause a problem within the game. But then you have that other group of players are who are there that seem to be part of their personality to create a problem at the table, and for whatever reason. And again, like with most of these talks, there's no magic solution. I'm just curious. I was just curious to see what people had as far as ideas and how to manage this and how to keep the game fun. And unfortunately, sometimes some of these players do have other things to offer, and they are fun to have around. But then you sit there going, man, like they are really making this difficult for everybody else. And mind you, I'm keenly aware this is not just gaming. I'm keenly aware this deals with, as I've mentioned, creative collaborations. This has to do with work. This has to do people at work who are the same way, where you're just like every day you're like what is the problem and and then at what point you start to evaluate, is it my job to negotiate their problem? Is it my job to negotiate their personality stress and problem? And the reality is no, it's not. As a game master, you're there to have fun, have fun, and have everybody else have fun. And I've gotten to the point in life that if there's one person that is continuously not making it fun, it's time for them to find another group. And it might not be their fault. Maybe it is simply you don't mix with them. That they don't mesh with what your idea of this should be. But I also find it stressful when people, as we've pointed out, as Wendell pointed out, when you try to engage in the broader discussion, and there's no attempt to engage, and worse than that, there's no attempt to move forward from that situation or acknowledge that they're somewhat at fault. Which, by the way, is also when I think of a problem player, not problem per se. Let's see. Well, right, and again, that's a very valid thing too. Now, I've had plenty of groups that I've either run one game for or I've played a game with, and I was like, oh yeah, they're fun. They're a great group of people. It's hilarious. Now, I don't ever want to run a game for them, And I've just been honest because I know what I want out of the game is way different than what they want. And exactly. So you have to evaluate. Now, is it normally your partner, Capo, who runs the games? And how does she deal with it? You know? Yeah, well, I don't think it's sticking the mud. I mean, I think it's about what you want out of the game, and I think it's also, I know that when I run one of these things, I put oftentimes, especially depending on the system and setting, this ridiculous amount of prep and work into it. And I get that it's me that's doing that, and no one's asking me to do that. But to run a good game, I feel I have to do that. And then if I have a bunch of people who aren't buying into that, and who are, you know, making it a contest to be a joke, to try to push the envelope and be goofy and all that. To me, it is a little frustrating. And again, like I said, I'm very fortunate with my two groups that I game with regularly now. I mean, we're goofy. We're complete idiots. There's no doubt about this. I'm sure if Blake's still here, he can attest to that, and Justin if he's here. Well, right, and I think she said that last time she was here. She was like, if it provides more fun for the group, I don't really care, and that's fine. And if that's the climate of the group, absolutely. So it's funny. Like I always joke around, and this is typical. Maybe not so much now. Maybe even 10 years ago, I thought, well, I'm not much different, than 20-year-olds. I could game in a gaming group full of 20-year-olds. And now, of course, I'll listen to my students who are gamers talk about their games, and I'm like, nah, we just want very different things out of a game at this point, like what you just found hilarious in that game and fun in that game, I would not at all find fun in that game. So there's no way that would ever mesh. And part of that's generational too. Part of that's generational references, cultural references that are so different. I mean, I even know most of my in-person group is between the ages of 30 and my age. And sometimes I'll make a reference and I realize it's just gone totally over most of their heads. And I'm just like, oh man. I'm like, oh man. I'm like, oh, that hurts. Or they'll bring something up as a reference. And I'll be like, I got no clue. Show me. So. But again, this isn't cut and dried. It's not easy. And I made it very clear, like even in the description of this, like, is the player really the problem? And right, in some cases they are. When I had the case of the stalker player that was kind of harassing people outside of the game, yeah, that was a problem. But that was a totally different problem. That wasn't even a game problem. That was this person has other severe issues that need to be addressed, and not by me because it's not my job. So, is the person who chronically sulks and screws your game up by sulking, is the person who is habitually cheating and screwing over other players in some way. I mean, that is a problem. It is a problem personality. And part of it is determining, is it worthwhile trying to talk to them? Is it worthwhile trying to keep them engaged? That's up for the individual game master and group to decide. Well, I think we're going to start rolling it up. If anyone's got anything else they want to throw at us, throw at me. By the way, I picked this picture because I typed medieval frustration, and this was one of the first pictures that came up. And I said, yeah, this is kind of what it's like. This is kind of what it's like when like you have that one person that's being a problem, and the game master here is trying to, well, in this case, I think they're trepanning that person, boring a hole in their head. Snap raptors. And aggressively dance toward us. So there's a very classic example of, while I find that very humorous, it's definitely a different type of game than I play. She was like, yes, yeah, of course, yeah, that's how it goes. I mean, again, we're goofy too. Our D&D group's goofy as well. I mean, we have that whole, the rainbow turkey. I don't know if Justin's still here. The rainbow turkey has lived in infamy. It was so stupid and so protracted, and it ended up taking up most of a game session. And all it started with was me saying, all right, during the second watch, you two hear this strange noise in the bushes. That's all it was. And before the end of the game, the group collectively had fabricated this magical bird known as the rainbow turkey, and they caught one and they ate it, and they found out it was worth this ridiculous amount of money, from these wood elves that were coming through, and the wood elves were horrified. They had killed their sacred. I mean, it was just so stupid. And this went on, and it has become a joke. Like, it's been this ongoing joke since that encounter. So much so we have had rainbow turkey toys show up around the holidays, that people have found, and it's yeah. But again, the D&D games I run are very different from the other games I run, and then that segued into the longer D&D campaign, which actually became very serious, including a trip into Ravenloft, into the Mists, and into one of the Dread Realms. So it became, the tone of it radically shifted within a couple game sessions. But the Rainbow Turkey was just like, and I'm just thinking, there's the game master, like, they're never even going to see any of the other content that I wrote tonight because of this stupid Rainbow Turkey that was literally something everybody came up with collectively. So, yeah. Well, I think on the note of the rainbow turkey, we're gonna close it down. I'll keep the chat open for a little bit, like I have been doing. Again, thanks for everybody coming in and chatting. It was a more intimate group. That's what we call it, a more intimate gathering, which is fine. And like I said, I found it very interesting. This topic got the least number of responses out of any of my chats, even just like some of the really stupid ones I did like in the spring when I was just testing all this out. So, you found a rainbow turkey? There is one. So I, at one point, yeah, there was, at one point, did you find one in real life? There's actually a South American breed of turkey that has rainbow feathers. And I was so blown away. One day I just searched rainbow turkey on the internet. And I'm like staring, and I'm like, oh my God, they're real. Like, I had absolutely no idea, and nobody in the group did. Again, this was this total ludicrous fabrication that just came out of this encounter, this ridiculous encounter. And then I like sent the picture to everybody. Rainbow turkey. It's a South American bird. They might have them in Florida. Who knows? Maybe you'll encounter one. We'll end it on a light note. There they are. And it was so bizarre because I had no idea this thing even existed in the real. Yeah, Twitch won't let me send the picture. It won't even let me send this link. Twitch is weird sometimes. I still like it better than anything else I've tested out. Yeah, thanks for coming by, everybody. All right, won't let me copy a link into this. That's really strange. Won't let me copy this link into it. Let's see. Let me try this. Try skirting. It might be a web protection thing. Let me try skirting around it. No, that's really strange. Well, and paste. Okay, there it is. So yeah, there's the rainbow turd. Yeah, that's one advantage of Discord. I mean, again, don't get me wrong. Our Warhammer games are ridiculous, but Warhammer by its very nature is ridiculous. So again, we during our Warhammer game we sent all these stupid pictures to each other, usually some sort of lewd joke, and then we have a meme that we send to each other over it. So I mean, again, I'm not saying that I'm so serious that my games aren't fun. And online it is a different thing. Online is a very different thing than it is when you're sitting around a table. I've noticed that. But as King Conan said, that's another story. Or as was said about King Conan, that's another story. All right, folks, thanks for coming by. I think this was a good chat. I'll put my sandwich board up again. My begging board, as I like to call it. And I'm going to leave the chat going in case there's any more chat that occurs. But thanks again for coming. And we'll see you throughout the weekend next week. Yeah, glad to see you pop in, Blake. By the way, I got your text. I talked about that too. That I didn't name names, but yeah, I talked about that. That's where we became the whats, the a-holes in the situation. Because we were like. But anyway, gamers are weird, different personalities, and I've just decided that. All right, guys, and all right, people. I've stopped saying that because I'm trying to deprogram myself from generally addressing people as guys. That's a habit. That's me, old man habit. So people, viewers, friends. See you soon.